Finally, Frankenstein. Here we're going to look at how to write a close reading of a text. All we mean by close reading is that we stick only to what's written in the text, no reliance on historical context, critical theory, etc. to analyze the text. Analysis simply means breaking something down to its parts and figuring out a pattern that ties those parts together. Later, we're going to look at more contextualized readings you're allowed to make, that acknowledge that a subject doesn't end at the limits of itself. Audience, historical context, racial contexts, etc. all mean something. In order to break something down into its parts, we need to identify its parts. So, first, the point of view. Whether first, second, or third person refers to the narrator. In Frankenstein, we have 3 points of view that narrate the novel. Also, the narrative point of view is primarily told through letters. Second, symbolism. A symbol is any image that represents an idea or set of ideas outside of itself. A rose, for example, may represent both love and death, depending on the context. Third, allusions. An allusion is a reference to another text outside of the text under consideration. If you read Barack Obama's first acceptance speech, you would find allusions to Lincoln, to Martin Luther King Jr., and to Malcolm X. Fourth, plot is a series of events that make up the story. Characters are, well, they're the characters, of course, and there are things like tone and mood, which refer to the feeling that the story creates. Fifth, we have theme, or what the story is about, so far as we can tell. We're going to rely on theme a lot in our examples. To begin, we need to break the story into its parts and even break those parts into smaller parts. So, for example, point of view. We find there are 3 points of view: Walton, Victor, and the creature. I also see that the story is told in a narrative frame. That is, they are nested. To the right, you can see that the monster story is told to Victor, who tells it to Walton, who tells it to his sister. Each layer frames the previous layer. There must be a reason Mary Shelley did this. We could make the argument that this structure forces us to compare the speakers. They each speak of their ambitions. They each mention their education, what books they read. They speak of their responsibility to others, even though they mostly refuse their responsibilities. At the very center of the story, there is also a woman whose story is told by the monster. Why is she there? Especially when, at the far end of the frame, the ultimate audience is another woman. Symbol. Here we can take a look at lightning. I'm going to pause a moment, and you should hit pause literally. Try some practice and write down, or at least think about, what lightning symbolizes to you or to our culture. Okay, welcome back. What did you think about? I'll be honest. The first thing that jumped in my head was Back to the Future. Because they used lightning bolt to charge up the flux capacitor and time travel. But 80s comedies probably don't give me much of a hint into what Mary Shelley. So I kept thinking and remembered lightning as a child. This seems apt since Victor introduces himself to lightning as well when he's a child. It's violent, it's random, it's mysterious, even though we kind of know what it is, and it's frightening. If we then look at the text itself for how Mary Shelley writes about the lightning, we can begin to see what she wanted us to make of it. The tree blasted is a warning. Trees usually represent life. This lightning that has attracted Victor, this passion for understanding the natural world, is represented here in the lightning and its consequences. Life blasted to pieces. The first reference occurs on page 23 of our text. Quote, "It was not splintered by the shock, but entirely reduced to thick ribbons of wood. I never beheld anything so utterly destroyed." On page 66, we find trees utterly destroyed by an avalanche. Trees offer shade and food to the creature. On page 114 and 115, Victor calls himself a blasted tree, tells us that the bolt has entered his soul. Shelley obviously wants us to compare trees to the natural state of things and to our hero, perhaps even to his family, and the lightning as the violent act of inspiration. There are several allusions throughout Frankenstein, many of them religious in nature. The God creating an Adam story, of course, is probably the one that stands out the most to you. Many of the books the monster reads refer to great individual heroism, to passions governing where reason has fled. And themes. There are plenty of themes in Frankenstein we can look at. Hopefully, you don't have to look far to find references to childbirth. The death of Victor's mother, for example. The creature referring to his creator as father, etc. Why is there no mention of childbirth other than the one that results in death? Does every birth result in death? Does it mean something that this man has created life without the participation of a woman? Marriage is a theme. The monster wants a bride, a wife, a partner. Frankenstein's final refusal comes when he sees his version of the female form. You see, here I've begun asking questions instead of simply stating what happens in the text. If the creature is like a child, then the child kills Elizabeth in her wedding bed. What is Mary showing us about parenting and childbirth by that image? Okay. We've started breaking the story into its parts. The next step would be to start fitting those parts together to make a pattern.